Very good. Welcome to, it is August 17th, 2017, and we are at another E-Rotary Coastal Club meeting online. I am Philip Zimmerman. I'm the club president. Charles Gagne, who is our president-elect, and typically the one who runs these meetings, is in Connecticut on business, and so he's given me the 5-minute training on how to operate this system, and so we'll do the best we can. If we have technical difficulties, it's definitely my error. But I just want to welcome everybody to today's meeting, and we'll start in our normal fashion. In Rotary fashion, we say the Pledge of Allegiance in honor of our flag, as our president would say. But this has been a long-held tradition within Rotary International. And so if you would participate with me if you'd like, or not, just allow the Pledge of Allegiance to be spoken. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Another tradition of the Rotary Club is the four-way test, and this is of the things we think, say, or do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? This is the four pillars of core values for Rotary International of how we conduct our business, and our desire is that we would deal in truth, fairness, goodwill, and friendship, and we like to have fun. And so that's the four-way test. I'd like to go ahead, before we introduce our speaker, to just get into some brief club business. Rebecca Wisbar, our member attorney, is in the final stages of preparing our corporate documents, which we will then allow us to get an EIN number from the federal government, which will then allow us to get a bank account and start conducting money collection for the club, as well as conducting other club business as an official club. The past District Governor Francis has requested that we do a little charter celebration of some sort. So I'm going to send out an email to all the club members to try to find a convenient day, time that we can meet in a location that would be convenient for everyone, and we'll have a official Rotary celebration. And at that point, be able to distribute pins and other documents for those who are able to attend, and then I'll make a special either trip or via mail to mail the other remaining members their Rotary pins, as well as their documents that signify their membership in Rotary International. Let me go ahead and get into our, that's really it for the Rotary business. Let me get my slide to move forward. A little bit slow here. There you go. Today, we've in fact, I was speaking with Bret before we started the meeting and going over the list of speakers we've had so far this year for E-Rotary Coastal Club, and he was quite impressed with the individuals we've had, and he was hoping that he wasn't going to just be repeating what had already been spoken. And I just wanted to assure him that, they say you save the best for last, or he's following a great lineup, but most everyone we've had speak so far has discussed CPRA and their activities with the master plan. And so today we have Bret Haase. He's the division chief of the planning and research at Louisiana Coastal Protection Restoration Authority. And Bret manages the research, planning, and development of Louisiana's comprehensive master plan for a sustainable coast. In addition to the Louisiana Coastal Area Ecosystem Restoration Program, the Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection Restoration Program, and the Beneficial Use of Dredge Material Program. So as you can see, Bret wears many hats, and we are very happy to have him here today. And with that, Bret, I'm going to pass the presenter role over to you. And when you receive the presenter role, if you would go to the top three buttons at the top of your screen, and you'll see where it says silence all microphones. If you can silence everybody's microphone, you'll be able to have a clear presentation. I can see your presentation fine, Bret, so you can go ahead and start.
Okay, where's the silence button? I'm not seeing that. Is that the?
I think if you look at the three little buttons at the top, it should say mute everyone else. Do you see it? Maybe it's on mine.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it, but.
All right, go ahead. You can start your presentation, Brett. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much, and thank you all for having me here with you today. It's certainly a pleasure to be talking with this group. I was talking with Philip, as he mentioned beforehand, and certainly you've had an august body present to you already. Some of this may have been covered by those folks, but this is really an overview of CPRA's work and really the document that drives everything it is that we do here at CPRA as it relates to our coastal master plan. And so I'll go ahead and jump right into it. I always like to start with this slide because I think it's very true. I don't think there's an issue affecting coastal Louisiana, to be honest with you, that has as much unanimous, frankly bipartisan, people from all walks of life, committed to. I think certainly we don't all agree 100% of the time on all the things that we think we need to do along our coast, but everyone who lives along our coast and many, many others, in fact, certainly are committed to doing something. People understand the issue and its potential impacts on our coast and indeed the nation. And because of that, and because we have a plan, a single vision that we can all speak from about our coast, is certainly a unique thing for Louisiana and something that's been very beneficial to us. Most of you are probably aware of this, but certainly we hold coastal Louisiana near and dear to our hearts, and it's certainly a national treasure when you think that over half of the population of Louisiana lives in what you would consider to be coastal Louisiana. The economic and ecosystem benefits that coastal Louisiana provides to the nation. 20% of the nation's waterborne commerce passes through coastal Louisiana. We've got the largest port complex in the world in terms of tonnage of cargo moved, and you see many of the migratory waterfowl course numbers and so forth listed here as well. That's extremely important to the rest of the country and really the rest of the world. Again, just another slide talking about the importance of coastal Louisiana to our country in terms of energy supply. 18% of the oil and gas produced in the United States is dependent on Port Fourchon in coastal Louisiana. Over 11,000 vessels traverse the Mississippi River, and I'll not read all these numbers. You guys can do that. But when you start to add them up and add up the value of coastal Louisiana again to the nation and the world, it's truly amazing. And there's a tremendous amount of investment going on along our coast as we speak. Over $100 billion have been invested in the southwestern part of the state, or the Port of Lake Charles. That represents jobs being generated in the terms of about 50,000 jobs. It's certainly immense. 90% of the services for Gulf of Mexico offshore oil rigs and platforms comes right out of Port Fourchon. For every job created there are 5 jobs established elsewhere in Louisiana. And then you may not be aware, but there's an effort going on now to consider deepening the Mississippi River, and the economic impact of that and the benefit of that, again, not just to South Louisiana but to the nation, is immense in terms of tons of cargo that can be moved more efficiently out of our ports. And so, again, talking about this coastal issue, certainly we're facing, a crisis in coastal Louisiana. This is a look at historic land loss along our coast. The red on these maps are land loss. Green, of course, is land gain. Since 1932, we've lost almost 2,000 square miles of our coastal wetlands. And you can see those losses depicted here again in the red on this map. If we don't do anything to change the situation along our coast, we anticipate that loss into the future will continue. And so what I'll show you now is a prediction of what the future of our coast might look like. Again, red on these maps is land loss, green is land gain. And this is, the red on these maps that I'm getting ready to run through with you is loss in addition to that almost 2,000 square miles that I showed you earlier. So this is a potential look at additional loss out 10 years from today. Look out 20 years. at 30 years, at 40 years, and then a look at all that additional loss out at 50 years. Certainly, again, if we don't change the way we are managing our coast and the work we do along our coast, there's a potential for significant changes in our landscape moving out into the future. And this is important for a number of reasons, but not just because of the sort of intrinsic value and the ecological value of those coastal wetlands, but also because our wetlands really are our first line of defense against hurricanes and storm surges. And so, one of the ways that the changing landscape along our coast really hits home most in the manner, I guess, it's most felt by many of our coastal communities is how it relates to, or how it affects storm surges, hurricane storm surges. And so these maps that I'm going to show you here look at depths of flooding related to hurricanes across our coast. This is for about a 100-year event or something that's on the order of a Katrina or a Rita. And you can see that depths range from about 1 to 3 feet to over 15 feet under current conditions. And as you might imagine, as our coast is lost, those depths increase and they tend to move further inland. So this is a look out at year 10 and then a look out at year 25. And I'm going to run through that one more time. So this would be initial conditions, year 10, year 25, and then out at year 50. And again, those depths get shockingly deeper and move much, much further inland than we would anticipate experiencing under current conditions. All of this, of course, is really important for a bunch of reasons, but 3 of those primary reasons are listed here. Certainly, I mentioned the 2 million people living, basically south of the I-10 corridor. This is where we live. It's where we work, and coastal Louisiana obviously supports a unique and a very unique culture that is something that we want to continue, something that we want to preserve. It's the reason many of us live where we do, and why so many people enjoy visiting coastal Louisiana. So in recognition of this issue, of this crisis, the organization that I work for was formed. We're relatively new in state government. The Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, we were formed shortly after the hurricane season of 2005. Obviously, that was an eye-opening year. We had Hurricanes Katrina and Hurricanes Rita in that same year, experienced the catastrophes associated with those and the tremendous amount of land loss associated with those as well. And it really opened the eyes, I think, of state leadership at the time that, perhaps we could be conducting our business as it relates to risk reduction from hurricanes and restoration in a better way. The 2 things, was, I guess, better understood at that time, really need to be integrated. They rely on each other. A healthy coast certainly is important to our hurricane risk reduction system. And with a robust hurricane risk reduction system, certainly it's good to have that healthy coast that we can enjoy, live in, and certainly work in. And so one of our mandates was to develop a coastal master plan, to develop, implement, and enforce that plan. And so that's one of the big things that I do as part of this organization. In addition to implementing the plan. So we're going to talk a lot about planning, and I know people hear about studies and planning and why are we spending all this effort, but I want you to know before I get into the plan that there's a tremendous amount of activity going on along our coast. In the decade or so that CPRA has been in existence, about $20 billion has been secured for protection and restoration across our coast. Work's been done in all 20 coastal parishes. We've dredged and pumped about 120 million cubic yards of material to do things like build marshes and barrier islands and ridges and so forth. That's benefited over 36,000 acres of coastal wetlands. 282 miles of levees have been either constructed or improved during that time, and about 60 miles of barrier islands or berms have been constructed, and barrier shorelines have been constructed over that same period of time. So an awful lot of work has gone on. Certainly more needs to be done, and more is going on right now as we speak. So this is a picture from a groundbreaking at the Caminada Headland project. This project was recently completed, one of the largest projects we've ever built. This is the Elmer's Island area, if you're familiar with Grand Isle and Fouchon. But we're turning dirt right now at Bayou Bonfouca. We're building marsh there. Whiskey Island is an island that's construction is being undertaken right now, and then over in the western part of the state, Oyster Bayou, we're building about 550 acres of marsh over there right now. So lots has occurred and lots is happening right now, and certainly there's a lot of activity planned for the near future. In terms of objectives of the plan, you see those listed here. So obviously we want to protect our citizens from flooding, and that's flooding primarily related to hurricane storm surges, tropical storm surges. We want to harness the natural processes that help build coastal Louisiana in the first place. Obviously, it's a natural and efficient way, we believe, to help restore our coast. We want to do that, of course, to provide coastal habitats for important recreational and commercial species. We want to preserve that cultural heritage. I mentioned that already. That's so important to many of us that live along our coast. And certainly Louisiana's coast is indeed a working coast. When I talk about what issues related to Louisiana's coast to folks in other parts of the country, they talk about their wetlands and their places that they might visit on the weekends to perhaps fish or hunt or something like that. And certainly we encourage that, and those are good things. But I don't think there's a coast in the United States that really is intricately linked, I guess, to the economy of our state and certainly our coastal area as there is in coastal Louisiana. It truly is a working coast. So I mentioned that we were, about a decade ago, we were mandated to develop a plan. And so you might say, well, if we already have a plan, why do we need to do another plan? And there are a few reasons for that. This 2017 plan actually is the third iteration of our coastal master plan. First one was in 2007, second one in 2012, and of course this one just this year. The first reason that we update the plan is that we're required to by law. So as we were being formed and the statutes were being developed that formed our agency, and we were being directed to develop this plan, we were also directed to take a look at it every 5 years or so. Every 5 years. And this is, done for a couple of reasons. Most of us have insurance and have long heard the notion that it's good to periodically review your insurance policies to make sure you're adequately covered. And essentially that's what we're doing by updating the plan here. As we implement projects, we learn more, technology gets better. As time goes on, certainly our predictions for the future become better. And all of that information, as we update the plan, can get worked back into those updates. And so it's really a mechanism for us to, sort of check our progress, check our technology, check the science, latest science and engineering, and ensure that we're incorporating all of that into the work that we do so that we don't develop a plan, say, in 2007 and expect it to be appropriate and adequate, 20, 30, 40 years into the future. We are very well aware that certainly if a hurricane hits our coast, we know our coast is changing all the time. It's a very dynamic place, but it can change extremely dramatically in a matter of 24 or even less hours if we're hit by a major hurricane. And so it allows us to incorporate those changes and again, new information and the body of knowledge into the work that we do. So I'm often asked, what really is the master plan? And it's an awful lot of things, but I think it really boils down to two main things. One, it's a way to make really hard decisions about what we think are the best investments for the state of Louisiana and for our coast. So we've got this really challenging, complex analytical challenge that we've got to deal with. We've got this complex coast. We're planning for a 50-year outlook, 50-year planning horizon. We don't know exactly what the future will hold. We're looking at these multiple project types. And of course, not everybody wants the exact same thing, right? We've got different community needs along our coast. And then there's no real single optimal answer. There's no one right answer. How do you balance risk reduction with restoration along our coast? Should more emphasis be placed on one or the other? What about near-term and long-term benefits? And then again, the sort of different stakeholder preferences comes into play here. And so when you have all of this stuff in play, it can become very difficult to make decisions about what to do, and you can end up in a sort of paralysis by analysis type of a situation. And so the master plan really is a framework to try to wade through and deal with all of these issues in hopefully a fair, equitable manner, and make those hard decisions about what we think we can do along our coast. And then the second thing the master plan really is it's a list of projects. It's a to-do list. It's those things that we want to do that we think, again, represents the best investments for our coast to provide, to protect our citizens and provide for a sustainable coastal Louisiana. So I mentioned different iterations of the plan. This is the third one. So you might ask, well, what's different about this 2017 plan? And some of those things are listed here. Certainly, as we moved to completion of the 2012 plan, there were some things that we felt like perhaps we could do better, and we didn't even let the ink dry on that plan before we got together and asked questions like, what are some of the tools that we might tweak if need be? What are some of the things that we think we can do better or change for 2017? And so that was done. A large effort was done to improve our predictive models, for example, outreach and engagement, and some other things. And those things were incorporated in 2017. New ideas and information. Certainly, CPRA doesn't believe it has all of the answers to all the questions that we've got. There's an awful lot of knowledge out there in the communities and the folks that live along our coast, and so we asked them, what do you think we need to consider as part of this plan? What are some of the projects that maybe we haven't thought of that need to be considered? And so we put 2 calls out to the public for just that, for project ideas to be considered in 2017. Many of those, of course, were evaluated and are included as part of the final 2017 plan. There's an increased focus on flood risk reduction and resilience among our communities, and you'll see that as if you have a chance to look at any of the master plan documentation, as a much more robustly described and fleshed out non-structural risk reduction program. There's an increased emphasis on our communities and really how our land loss issues and coastal issues affect those communities, really where the rubber meets the road in terms of things like, how might I insure my home against flooding, or can I? And so there's a good document, a companion document to the plan called The People in the Landscape. Would encourage you perhaps to go to our website and take a look at that if that interests you. Mentioned a kind of expansion of outreach and engagement. And then one of the other changes was with the settlement related to the BP dollars, we'll have a little clarity in terms of how dollars might come to the state to begin to implement this plan or continue to implement this plan. And so we were able to move some dollars that we would have otherwise expected perhaps to come to the state later on up earlier into our planning timeline, the planning horizon. As we all know, money now is better than money later, and projects on the ground now is certainly better than projects later. So that was a big benefit there. In terms of the process of developing the plan, this is sort of the schematic there. Of course, it starts with projects. I mentioned projects already. What projects do we want to evaluate and consider as part of the plan? Those projects are run through a series of predictive models that help us evaluate the performance of those projects, and I'll get into that in more detail in a bit. And then we have a planning tool that helps us evaluate the output from those models, essentially. So, and I'll describe that in more depth earlier. But then we can put projects together in terms of alternatives, ultimately develop or compare those alternatives ultimately to develop a draft plan that was commented on by the public and resulted in the final plan. So let's talk a little bit about projects. 209 projects were considered and evaluated as part of this planning process. 135 of those were restoration projects. You see them listed on the map here in terms of different shapes and colors and polygons and so forth. You can see the different project types: bank stabilization, marsh creation, barrier islands, and so forth listed here. 54 non-structural risk reduction projects were evaluated. Now, these are things that are sort of non-traditional flood protection type projects, for example. So this would be elevation of homes, flood proofing of non-residential structures, elevation of residences, and then voluntary acquisitions where that might be deemed necessary for very, very high risk structures. Then there are 20 structural protection projects that were evaluated, and these are things like levees, floodgates, flood walls, things that we're more used to talking about when we talk about flood risk reduction. One thing I wanted to point out is, I talked about making tough decisions earlier, and just to highlight sort of the demand or the need for this kind of work along our coast. If we did a rough estimate of what it would cost to implement all 209 of those projects, all of which certainly have some merit. And if you tally that up, you're looking at about $150 billion worth of work. We don't think it's realistic, over the next 30, 40, 50 years for the state to have access to and invest $150 billion in this kind of an effort. We think, I'll get to this in a little bit, but we think that $50 billion level is about right. So the question becomes, again, how do you make those hard decisions about whittling down $150 billion worth of projects down to something that we think is more realistic and honest? Because we do want to be realistic and honest with our coastal citizens about what it is we think we can deliver, what we think the future might hold along our coast, so that they can make good, informed decisions about life, frankly, about where they live, where they work, and where they might do so in the future. So getting into the predictive models just a bit, again, this is where we ask questions like, how do our projects affect, how water moves along our coast, or what happens to shrimp, what happens to other fish and wildlife species, what happens to the vegetation, are we eroding land, are we gaining land, how does sediment move, and so forth. And then the other part of that is what you see at the bottom of the slide here, the surge, waves, and risk assessment modeling, where we ask, again, how project might affect storm surges and waves, and then how does that translate to hopefully reduce risk to our communities from those storm surges and waves. And all of this is being done over a range of potential futures, these environmental scenarios, and I'll get into that a little more detail here. A lot of information on the slide. Really, the main thing you need to be aware of here is that in order to sort of evaluate the effectiveness of our plan, we have to have an idea, back up there, we have to have an idea of what the future may hold without the plan in place, right? So, and then the difference, the benefit of the plan in place and the future without the plan is sort of the benefit that we accrue by implementing the plan. Well, we know that we're not very good at predicting the future, right? I mean, we have a hard time predicting the weather later today. Certainly as we get out in that 10-day forecast, out at the 10th day, you have a hard time really with a high degree of certainty knowing what that prediction might be. And the same is true as it relates to land loss across our coast. So what we've done is try to develop a plan around a range of potential futures as it relates to land loss. And so in the future, we might experience a low rate of land loss, a medium rate of land loss, or a high rate of land loss. And the factors that you see on the other pieces of this are part of this slide, essentially just to affect whether or not you achieve or experience that high, medium, or low rate of land loss. And so our goal is to develop a plan and select projects that are robust across this sort of range of potential futures, because we know if we pick one of those, the likelihood of it being right, frankly, is not all that high. If we pick low and we experience medium or high, we're probably not doing a very good job and not being efficient with investments along our coast. And I'll touch on that a little bit more in a bit. Excuse me. So let's look at some predictions in terms of the landscape for the future. So this is a future without action at year 50 under the low scenario. So this is without a plan in place. What we might the coast might look like under that low land loss scenario 50 years into the future. This is for the medium scenario, and then for the high scenario. And so you can see certainly under this high scenario the potential for the health of our coast in the future, if we don't do anything again, is pretty dire. So let's get into the planning tool a bit. Once we've evaluated those projects again and have hopefully answered the questions related to what happens to vegetation, fish, and wildlife, and so forth, there are really two primary things that we look at in terms of deciding whether or not to include a project in the plan, and that's how well do those projects reduce flood risk to our communities, and how well do they build or maintain land. And so while we have those primary decision drivers, flood risk reduction and land building, there's some real constraints that we have to work with. And I already touched on one of those. Funding, of course, is a constraint that most of us live with in our daily lives. It's certainly something that we deal with as we're developing this plan and implementing projects. Again, we don't think we're going to get $150 billion over the next 50 years to implement everything that we believe our citizens deserve and need. So what's a realistic amount? And it turns out that $50 billion level is what we think is sort of a plausible, reasonable amount. There are also some real natural resource constraints like sediment, fresh water, nutrients, and so forth. And so we developed the plan, again, within those constraints so that we are hopefully being as realistic as possible in terms of what we might deliver. There are also some things that are really important to our communities that we know about that aren't captured simply by flood risk or land building. So there's some things that we can measure in terms of outputs that the plan deliver related to communities and the environment that you see listed here. Things like how might the plan affect traditional fishing communities, or blue crabs, or sustainability of land, or waterfowl, or agricultural communities. And so we're able to look at the outputs of the plan essentially through these other lenses to communicate how the plan might affect some of these things that are of concern to many of our coastal stakeholders, citizens, and communities. So in terms of all of that, that's kind of the technical side of things, the analysis and so forth, and developing the plan. But we know that's not always as responsive really to the needs of our communities as we need to be. And so as we're developing all this, as we're going through sort of this technical process, we're also engaged very heavily with a wide group of stakeholders and a wide group of advisory groups. You see those folks listed here, and just know that throughout the development of this plan, there were well over 200 or so opportunities for us to have discussions about the process, the plan, the draft plan, and so forth over a 4.5 year period, really, with many of those folks. So I think in terms of trying to communicate with our stakeholders and the concerned citizens, this was really an unprecedented effort. Now, I will say that I think one truism with outreach and engagement is that you can never do enough. No matter how much you do, I don't think it's ever enough, and certainly we'll continue to strive to get better on that front. In terms of official public meetings that were held, there were 4. You see where the locations of those were. And so let's get into the plan a bit. And I want to talk about some key decision points for 2017 as we went from developing the plan to putting a draft out. So I mentioned the overall funding amount there. It's $50 billion, and we're able to front load some of those into the 50-year planning horizon as well. So how much do you spend on restoration, and how much do you plan on spending on risk reduction? And so we did a little analysis on that, and it turns out that really the 50-50 split is kind of the sweet spot where you're getting good benefit for the dollars expended. And so there's $25 billion in this plan for risk reduction and 25 for restoration. Talked about the scenario planning a little bit and the potential futures that we might experience. And so what we decided to do for this plan was to formulate the plan assuming that we would experience the worst conditions that we evaluated, or that high level of land loss into the future. Certainly we don't hope for that, but the reason we developed a plan related to that is because if we, again, if we plan for that high, but we experience something less than the high rate of land loss into the future, we've done a good job, I think, and have been a good steward of all of our dollars, and have taken a conservative approach in terms of implementing projects along our coast. If we plan for the high and assume that things are going to be, perhaps rosier than they turn out to be, if we plan for the low and we experience something higher than that, then we've probably not done a very good job planning for our future. And again, we're going to update this plan every 5 years, so we're able to monitor that and adjust that as we move forward. In terms of near-term and long-term results, there basically equal emphasis was placed on both of those. Certainly, we understand the urgency and the need for work to get completed and be done now, but we also want to be responsible and ensure that we're providing benefits along our coast for our children and grandchildren. And in terms of public input, we received a tremendous amount of public input. I think 3,300 public comments were made to this plan. Many of those comments were incorporated into the plan, and there were some substantive changes made between the draft and final plan based on that public input. So this is the plan. This is it in a nutshell. This is the map that shows the projects that were selected as part of our coastal plan. There are 124 projects, and really the 2 take-home messages here are that we believe by implementing this plan, we can reduce flood damages by about $150 billion over the next 50 years and provide about 802 square miles of land that we otherwise would not have but for having the plan in place. So we'll take a closer look in the southwestern part of the state and what's in the plan. You can see a number of projects listed here. I'll not go through these. I believe this will be available online. If you're interested, you can go back and take a look at that. As we move over to the west, you see we're starting to get into some of the Bear Island projects, and we obviously have the Atchafalaya River here, so you get into some diversion projects off the Atchafalaya River, and then you see more of the same really as you move further to the east. Obviously, the Mississippi River is in this region, and one of the key types of projects in this area are river diversions as well. 32 non-structural projects were selected, and you can see each of those listed here. They're each color, each shape you see here represents an area where we believe we need to implement some of these non-structural risk reduction projects. In terms of the breakdown of funding by project type, you can see it here. Again, there's a 50-50 split between restoration projects and risk reduction projects. and you can see how the dollars are planned to be expended among these project types into the future. And so again, we'll look at some landscape maps, and we'll look at the future. We're going to look at some future without actions again. So future, what our coast might look like in the future without the plan implemented, and then what it might look like with the plan implemented. And so you'll see a red X on the cover of the plan in the top right of this slide here. So this is a future without action, no plan in place, out at year, and I can't see the year here because of the screen, but I think this is year probably 25. And then this is with the plan in place. And so what you're seeing here is the greens on this map, essentially a result of implementing the plan. So this is land, again, that we otherwise would not have if we had not implemented the plan. And then we'll look out again, I believe, again, this is at year 50 without the plan in place, and then you look at the plan in place and you see some of the benefit in terms of land building across our coast of implementing the plan. Mentioned 802 square miles already. So let's look at how this might impact storm surges. Very similar to the landscape maps I talked about earlier. These are flood depths without the project in place out at year 25. I believe that was 25. And then here's with the plan in place. And then it's hard to see the difference there. So here you have a difference map. And really the thing to concentrate on here is these greens and blues are reduced flood depths, again, as a result of the plan being in place. We'll do the same thing looking out at year 50. This is without the plan in place, with the plan in place. And then you can see the difference maps here. And again, you see the benefit of having the restoration and risk reduction projects on the ground in terms of reducing flood depths out into the future. Excuse me. So looking out at year 50, the way we sort of measure the reduced risk is in terms of expected annual damages. And out at year 50, that we expect those expected annual damages to be reduced by about $8.3 billion for that year 50. When you roll that up, that's how you get to the $150 billion figure that I mentioned earlier. So what does all this mean for Louisiana and for our coast? What does the plan deliver? Well, we provide a diversity of projects. I think that there was a time in restoration efforts in Louisiana where we were debating what was the right thing to do. Is it diversions? Is it marsh creation? Is it barrier islands? Is it one thing or another? And I think one of the things that this plan demonstrates is that we really have to move beyond that, and I think most of us probably have. But it's not an either-or kind of a situation right now. We really can't afford to leave any project type, any projects on the table. It's really an all-hands-on-deck kind of a situation that we're in now. Of course, we build and sustain land, again, 800 or so square miles of land that we wouldn't have otherwise, and we can reduce risk to on the order of about $150 billion to our coastal communities. I didn't mention this in great detail, but certainly with the plan in place, our ecosystem does benefit. Generally speaking, our fish and wildlife resources are better off with the plan in place in 50 years than they would be otherwise. And this plan gives us some time to prepare and adapt. So, many of those maps that when we first looked at them, the sort of predictions in terms of land loss and even the predictions with the plan in place are pretty scary. There's still a lot of land loss. Our coast is going to change in the future whether we implement a plan, no matter what we do or if we don't. And so what this plan does, I think it gives us some time to plan and adapt to that potential change in the future, but it also, not to overstate it, but puts us in control of our own destiny, right? So we have two choices. We can allow our coast to change and essentially impart its will on us as it changes, or we can choose to try to manage that change, hopefully for the best of our coast, of our state, and certainly our nation. And then lastly, it really provides some opportunity for economic benefit. So, we're dealing with issues in coastal Louisiana that other parts of the country really have already started to deal with, and if they haven't, certainly will into the future. Places like Norfolk, Virginia, New Jersey, and New York, clearly they're dealing with some similar issues now in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. But, Miami, the Bay Area, and so forth. If predictions for climate change are remotely accurate, then again, we're dealing with issues here in Louisiana that others are going to need to. And so we're developing this skill set, this knowledge base, and this workforce to deal with these kind of issues that we believe will be useful in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, and really will become an exportable commodity for the state of Louisiana. Not to mention the tremendous amount of investment in our coast, just the economic driver that would be in the terms of billions of dollars of investment not insignificant. So there's lots of ways to get more information about what I've spoken about here. Certainly our website is really more information there than you can shake a stick at. So coastal.la.gov. If you really want to drill down in the weeds and some of the technical analyses, how we evaluated mottled duck habitat or brown pelican habitat or shrimp habitat and things of that nature, you can do that. And it's all available publicly at our website. In addition to some of those other documents that I mentioned, the people in the landscape and so forth, it's easily accessible at our website. If you're interested in what's happening in a particular parish, you can access that. We've got parish fact sheets. So each parish, each of our 20 coastal parishes has a fact sheet that talks about the potential future of that parish in terms of land loss and risk into the future, both with and without the master plan in place. And it lists, of course, the projects for that parish and what impact they may have. Got similar fact sheets for projects, or if you're interested in a particular project, you can go to our website and access that. It'll give you the basic information related to those projects. We've got an interactive planning or mapping tool as well. That is pretty interesting tool. So if you live along our coast, I'd encourage you to go to this. You can not just get project information, but you can actually type in your address and get information related to your flood risk, for example, today, 25 or 50 years into the future, both with and without the plan in place. It's a good interactive source of information related to issues along our coast. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Certainly happy to answer any questions. Again, I certainly appreciate your time and the opportunity to speak with you here today. And I'll end there. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Bren. We'll go ahead and if you'd like to turn your phones back on off of mute, please do so. And feel free to ask some questions. I saw Gary typed in a question. Gary, you want to ask Bren about your question?
Oh, sure. And when you were going through the difference between the 2012 and the 2017 plan, I know it's got a lot of press, and I wish you could just explain a little bit about the worst case scenario in 2012 and the best case scenario in 2012 and vice versa in the 2017 plans.
Absolutely. So that's a great question, and I'll we talk a little bit about worst case or best case, and it's important to note that when we say worst case or best case, we're talking about worst case that we evaluated, not necessarily the worst case that's possible. So I just want to make that point up front. So, but again, the question is very good. So yeah, I mean, in terms of updated predictions related to sea level rise and storm intensity and frequency and so forth, the worst case evaluated for the 2017, or excuse me, let me start over so I don't confuse everybody. The worst case sea level rise prediction for the 2012 plan is essentially the same as the best case for the 2017 plan. So predictions for sea level rise increased that much in that 5-year period, which is pretty daunting, pretty stark. But good question.
Thanks. Good answer.
All right. Anyone else? Anyone else have a question? Brett, I'm interested in the decision. If you evaluated, here's our wish list of projects, I guess initially, of what can we do along the coast, and you had the $150 billion worth of total expenditures on all the projects, and you established a realistic number that you thought was actually achievable at $50 billion. Is the additional $100 billion of projects that are left out, was there an evaluation that there would be a diminishing return on investment for those projects?
Yeah.
That allowed them to be cut out? Is that
That's
really
right.
Okay.
Yep, that's right. That's right. Certainly, expending additional dollars will get you more benefit, but it doesn't get you benefit at the same rate.
Right. Another question I had was, I've noticed on several slides, of course, I'm located here in Baton Rouge. Charles Gagne, our president-elect, is actually down on Bayou de Large in Terrio, Louisiana. So he's always in the middle of these conversations.
Yeah.
But what interests me is the north shore of Lake Maurepas. in that northwest corner, and that 50-year plan just showing it basically gone.
Yeah.
What's causing that loss so far inland for us? Really in the Baton Rouge area, the Slidell, Orpaw area. What's causing that? I always find that shocking that much land loss there in the Covington would be gone, Orpaw would be gone.
Yeah, a large portion of the Marpaw swamp would be converted, or the swamp would die essentially and go away. It's really driven by increased salinities associated with increased water levels, sea level rise.
Yeah. I think that I just, as a flatlander up here in Baton Rouge and not directly impacted myself personally by the coastal, that is for me something that I don't think we know enough about in regards to the significance of what we're looking at. Because when you hear about coastal land loss, I think a lot of persons or people like myself are thinking the coastal Louisiana, but I'm sure glad that's not going to affect me. When in fact you look at this map and, oh my gosh, yes, it's going to affect me. It's going to affect my neighbors. It's going to affect a lot of people that live around that, I guess, Livingston Parish, and is going to be dramatically impacted by that.
Yeah, that's true. Certainly Livingston and Ascension. Most people don't really think of those parishes as coastal parishes, but they are. And really Baton Rouge is. One of the things that always strikes me is we obviously have a lot of activity and do a lot of talks like these in New Orleans. And many folks in New Orleans really still don't consider themselves to be a coastal city. And I don't mean to be flip about it, but one of the lines I typically use when I'm talking to folks in New Orleans is, New Orleans absolutely is a coastal city, and unfortunately becoming more coastal by the minute. But that's really the case for as you said, Baton Rouge and Livingston, Ascension, and really all other, Lafayette even, Lake Charles, all other, metropolitan areas along the coast.
What has been the CPRA's appreciation for public awareness in regards to not just the master plan itself, but just the situation that we have that the master plan is trying to address? Is there do y'all view that the state itself and the region is aware of really what's going on, or is that something that's in the plan itself, or somehow y'all are helping to address that with the public?
Well, we again, I'll go back to my "you can never do enough" statement, right? I think that we can certainly do a better job, and we are trying to do a better job. But I will say that at least along the coast, I do think that there's a great amount of awareness of what's going on, and if not, perhaps what we're doing about it. One thing about Louisiana, it is a sportsman's paradise. A lot of people spend a lot of time along our coast outdoors, whether it's fishing, hunting, boating, whatever. And, so folks have seen it. Anybody that's spent an appreciable amount of time along our coast has seen the dramatic changes that have occurred, in our lifetimes, really in half lifetimes, right? I mean, if you spent, several years in an area along our coast, you've seen it change, pretty dramatically. So, I think that the issue is becoming much more, or people are becoming much more educated. People who live outside of the coast are becoming much more educated about the issue. Folks in North Louisiana and certainly other parts of the country are. But, one of the things that you'd mentioned earlier about, what are some things that perhaps Rotarians could do to get involved, and certainly that public awareness of the issue is tremendously important. I often tell folks, we have people that come to visit us for Mardi Gras and come to visit us perhaps to fish or whatever it may be from other parts of the country. And certainly we don't want to get preachy, but one of the things that I would encourage everybody to discuss with those folks is the issue affecting Louisiana and why it should be important to others in other parts of the country. So, if the Mississippi River's lost, the grain farmers in the Midwest are not going to be able to move their product to market, right? We saw what happened to gas prices nationwide after Hurricane Katrina. All of these things are affected by coastal land loss in Louisiana, and a lot of folks, unfortunately, have not connected those dots yet. But that's an important message, I think, that we can help share with others in other parts of the state and other parts of the country.
Well, very good. Any other questions for Bren? All right, and then Bren, I'm going to reclaim the presenter role from you. I've got a few last items that we're going to cover, and then we'll be done.
Okay.
If you're visiting, if you'd like to apply for our club, if you're online with us and you'd like to become a Rotarian and join the Rotary Coastal Club, if you went to our website erotarycoastal.org, you'll see an Apply Now button, and basically you just fill out the information. We'll review it, get back with you, and love to have you as a member of our club. Give you all the information on that. And then if you're a visiting Rotarian, there's an attendance certificate that you'll be able to find at once the meeting concludes at the bottom of the page. On our homepage, you'll be able to click on it and fill out your attendance certificate, return that to your club sergeant at arms, and you'll get credit for attending today's meeting. And so, Brandon, with that, let me just say thank you again for your presentation and all the work that you and the rest of the individuals at CPRA are providing to our state. It is an important and critical work that you're doing to help protect and rebuild some of our coast. And it just, again, from a perspective of not being there all the time and seeing it, I went fishing not too long ago, and again, it was just areas that I had been in the past weren't there.
Right.
The boat just kind of drove right over the island that used to be there, and it is shocking when you go there. And so it is very important. I don't think we can emphasize enough the storm surge protection that our coastal marshes provide for those who are living further inland. And the commercial and industrial facilities, oil and gas facilities that are down there, the investment that's been made that we will hope to retain is important and critical to what you're doing. So thank you again for your organization, the people that you have on staff, and I wish you the best of luck and continue to fundraise and to fund these projects. Gary had mentioned he was at a meeting earlier today talking about funding, and so our prayers will be with you and with those on the coast, that we'd be able to support you in any way we can. And I took a note on your suggestion of getting Rotarians to help spread the word, and that's something we're trying to do through eRotary Coastal, and we're going to try to do that through really on a national, international level as we continue to build our club, just to make Rotarians around the world aware of what we're doing. And it's something you'd said about what Louisiana is building as far as an experience and technical capabilities to handle these issues, because there are other coastal areas in the United States that are going to go through similar situations with sea level rise that we'll have developed expertise in and be able to assist them as well. So thank you again for your time. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And if no one has anything else, we'll go ahead and sign off. Anyone have anything else? All right, with that, Bren, we're going to end the meeting, and have yourself a fantastic day. And again, thank you for the presentation.
Well, thank you all. Appreciate your time and attention.
Very good. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.